Also, I
So
have my note.
we had a little bit of back and forth about what we were going to talk about
Yeah.
and what kind of shape this particular event would take. And then you were sort of like, I know exactly what I want to talk about. How, I guess, why did that come to you? Why this?
Oh, good question. It came to me because I've had the opportunity to observe social justice spaces um, across the Caribbean and also internationally. And there are just certain things that I notice happen time and time again. And they concern me because of the ways that what happens with leaders, right? What happens with human right defenders who are in leadership positions, those who are, executive directors and associate directors and managers and supervisors in organizations, trickles down to impact the wider community, in that how they manage their trauma or don't manage their trauma can cause distance between the organizations and the community, can cause the people in the community to feel even more alone because the people who should be representing them, they can't relate to them or they can't connect to them, or it feels like they are being emotionally violent to them. And I see it again and again. And, I talk to people in the UK and they're like, no, we have entire organizations that have just floundered simply because not simply, it's actually very complicated, because the people at the head haven't healed. They haven't healed their trauma. And because they haven't healed it, it's playing out again and again and again in their relationships with the people on their team, in their relationships with the people that they're supposed to be serving or representing. It comes up in the advocacy space. And more and more and more, when you talk to people, there's this feeling that it's toxic. Like on the inside of the social justice space, it's toxic. So one day I did this poll on Twitter, right? And it was only 19 people that answered. So please, this is not a massive research. I had no funding. But I did a poll on Twitter, right? And I was like, do you ever feel to move out of the social justice space? And if so, do you want to move out because of the inflexibility of people on the outside of the space or the inflexibility of people on the inside of the space? 89.5% of people said, if I want to leave the social justice space, it's because of the inflexibility of the people on the inside. And time again, people will talk to you about how exhausting it is to come to work, how managing the personalities of their co-workers is the hardest part of their job, how they feel like people just carry their problems, drop them in the middle of the office and move on. And there's this sense that there is not much accountability. Now, in theory, we are the ones out there telling people, oh, equity, oh, justice, oh, listen to people, oh, make a space for the oppressed, oh, be responsible with your power. But the people who work for us feel like they can't even open their mouth to say something to us because we're going to re-victimize them by what we do in response to what they've said. And I don't hear this one place. I hear this multiple places in multiple countries. I don't speak multiple languages, but I get the translation back to English and it's the same. And like, I'm worried. I'm worried about us. I'm worried that we are becoming more unhealthy as a result of the work we do, and our work is hard enough, without us becoming our own enemy.
But I guess why is it like this? We preach something, and for a lot of us, like, we believe it at our core, but for some reason when it comes to practice, it gets lost. And I think for a lot of people, it's easy to rationalize our behavior away. Like I hold on to power because I'm the only one in this group that knows things or that knows enough.
Yeah.
How do you get beyond that?
I mean, we have to release our idea of ourselves as victims. There's a way that we have over-identified with the victimization that put us in this job in the first place, right? So like when I told you I have notes because I will go off on a tangent. So like, because you asked me this question before in the pre-thing and I was like, okay, I'm gonna come prepared for this. What do I see when I look at the social justice space, right? Stress, right? People under stress. People are under stress because we ain't got no funding. The funders want to pay for project activities. They don't want to pay for salaries. Every couple of years, we have to rewrite our projects and redirect them so that we can access whatever the funders think is sexy right now. We overworked and we paid, right? There's too few of us trying to do too much work, but all of us feel that if I don't show up to work today, the whole community go fall in the cesspool, so I have to keep going, right? So automatically, many of us are working inside of a deep savior complex, right? And the savior complex is coming from a place of love. And that's the thing that I want to be clear on before I say this. Trauma, and people who, for people who have experienced trauma, like, probably most of us here, anything that feels like criticism can feel harmful, and it can be harmful because it can trigger you. So I want to be careful in having this conversation, that I don't want anybody to feel like I'm, trying to drape them up or drag them or anything like that. I'm a big Black woman and I talk with a strong voice, that the things I say can come out strong. That's not my intention. But that is not my intention. And at the same time, there are certain things that I feel like we need to talk about. So we're dealing with high levels of stress. We're passionate about the work. It's hard work. It's also work that we're doing from the heart. We're putting all type of energy, heart energy, womb energy, whatever, pancreas, spleen energy into it, right? Success, we are experiencing success, but also our trauma. The trauma that we sustained that brought us into the work, the trauma that to the work, the trauma that we are causing to people that we work with. So you join because you've been hurt. You're a part of an oppressed group. You have had your rights violated in some way. So you get into it. Okay, good. It gives you passion. It gives you drive. It gives you get up and go. It gives you motivation. What else? You have identified so much with your story that you can't see yourself as anything but that. You're so identified with being the hurt person that you can't see when you start hurting people, because many of us, our identities become our shield. I am a queer Black woman from the developing world. Okay, I'm from a developing country. I'm from multiple oppressed communities. And therefore, whatever I say, I understand that you try to challenge it because you are the oppressor. And so anything that people says to you that asks you to be self-reflexive is somebody being bigoted. But actually, you don't leave space to hold yourself accountable or to grow, right? So I come into the work because I've been hurt. And over time, I've over-identified with this aspect of myself. I know I can't see myself as anything else. I can't acknowledge distance traveled. Okay, yeah, when you started off, you were working for a fledgling NGO and you were making gratitude for money. Now you're the executive director of an NGO or a CSO or something, and you are earning a salary that is being computed on a US scale, not a Caribbean salary scale, a US salary scale. You are not the same as the people you're serving who are still living on gratitude, right? But for you to admit that feels like somebody is taking yourself from you, because this is how you understand yourself. This is how you have navigated the world. And this is also the story that you've told to access a lot of that funding, right? We don't want to admit that for people who work in social justice, especially when we're talking to people from North America, there's a way that we have to stylize our suffering and make it appealing to them for them to fund us. And so what happens when I have to admit that, yes, things are still awful, but they're not as bad as they used to be? We don't want to do that, because once I move away from things are awful, it feels as though, well, I don't exist anymore, because this is the thing that defines me, especially when we're talking about like that white male North American gaze. So we have a difficulty with acknowledging distance traveled. So we hold on to the origin story of where we were, the initial trauma, the thing that brought us here. And we don't want to admit when we're actually in a better place than the rest of our community. Also, when we don't want to admit when we're no longer able to speak for a group. And so when people come to you and they say, listen, I feel like you got that wrong. Actually, like, that's not really how our experience is. What do you mean? I'm from the same group as you. We come from the same place. Like, I am also a poor queer person, not anymore. You have organizational affiliation. You are visiting the UN. You are catching flights, not feelings, not anymore. You are a queer person. You are no longer a poor queer person. You have clout, right? You have clout. You are just traveling to London all the time to talk about your feelings, and people are paying you to do this. You're not the same as the people who are like most vulnerable and most excluded from your community. And we struggle with that, because despite the fact that we talk about fluidity, I think in social justice, we are actually quite committed to a binary. And the binary is that you have privileged people and then you have everybody else. And we have had such a limited discussion about privilege in some spheres that we don't want to be privileged people, because privileged people are those horrible, they're senseless, they have no nuance, they just have no sense. And so we don't want to acknowledge our own privilege because of the types of conversations that some of us have had about privilege and how limited they have been, right? So that's what happens when you join because you're hurt. You join because you care about your community. Perfect. You're here to do the work. But how much gratitude do you expect for the work that you go through? I care about this community and I get up every day and I'm struggling for them, and they're so ungrateful. Like, they just don't understand what I have to go through. I haven't slept in weeks. I have an ulcer. You know, we don't have enough money and we're still here doing the work. So when the community comes to you and is like, y'all got that wrong. How could you? No. You don't understand what we have to go through just to try to create a space for you to exist. So how, you know, we slip into the charity model, but because we are also oppressed people, we don't understand. So when we think charity model, we think rich white man from North America sprinkling, you know, tokens on Africa. That's what we think. We don't think queer person from the Caribbean who has in a slightly different income bracket, who is responsible for bringing funding into the Caribbean. I am now in the charity model as well, because all I can think about is everything that I'm giving to you. So my representation to you has now become, my service to you has now become the charity that I'm doing to you. And we can't see it, right? When we talk about like doing no harm, doing good doesn't mean you're not doing harm. The fact that you're a do-gooder doesn't mean that you don't have the capacity to do harm. And I think a lot of us, because we're working in social justice and it is this type of heart work, we don't recognize that if we don't interrogate the relations of power inside of it, then we will do harm. You're an employee from an oppressed community, right? So you're employed to the organization because you're a part of the community. Okay. So your employment with this organization becomes a site of power for you. You have a title behind your name. You're able to move into a better community. You're able to feed yourself properly, all of these things that you deserve. But how does that affect you? So this is your site of becoming, this organization and this position. How do you use that? Against other people in your organization, against other people in your community? Because the thing is, as humans, we want to feel whole and we want to feel like we're somebody, you know? But when you get that thing that's making you feel like somebody, what do? Have you thought about, you cost the other somebodies, the white somebodies, the powerful somebodies for how they are, but have you come up with another idea of what it means to be a somebody? Have you critically interrogated how you plan to be a somebody in a non-destructive way? Probably not, because you think, because you come from an oppressed community, you can't do the same damage. You can, because the master's tools, and those are the only tools that you have. They gave you a shovel and they gave you a pickaxe. Perhaps you need to go and learn how to use a spoon, but we haven't. And we think that the fact that we come from oppressed communities precludes us from doing this type of damage, and it does not. How threatened are you when that's taken away? I am the director for this organization. This is my space where I've become somebody. Prior to this, they used to call me a Batman in Jamaica. Now I'm a homosexual. I have elevated up the ranks, right? If I am no longer the director of this organization, do I exist? Do I still have respect? Do I still have access? I have all of these fears inside of me and know where to put them. And what do they come out as? I am deeply threatened by anybody who comes into the organization who seems smarter than me, more organized than I am, or like they can take my space, because if I lose it, then I go back to being nobody. There's like a big, you know, thing that needs to be healed. I have more, but I'll stop here in case you have anything you want to say.
There's so much in there. In the first part of what you were saying, it made me think about the way that identity becomes currency,
Yeah.
right? And we're sort of, I don't want to say forced, but strongly encouraged to build identity out of trauma, particularly when you're doing this kind of work and you're trying to get funded or you're trying to get recognition of some kind to enable you to do more work. Like you said, you're sort of forced to pull out all of the worst things about yourself, all the things that have happened to you, all of the parts of your identity that make you a marginalized or a vulnerable person. And so you start defining yourself that way. I'm Alicia. I'm a queer Black woman from the global, like, you know, like that becomes your sort of, your line that you say automatically it's the first line of your email. It's the first thing that you say to people when you meet them at conferences. And so you hold on to it. And you don't even recognize when some of those things change. Like you said, like you might not be experiencing poverty anymore, but it's sort of automatic. It comes out, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those ways that trauma becomes integral to who you are and the work that you do and how you access the things that you need to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people come to this work expecting it to be their healing, right? Like instead of dealing with the trauma, instead of therapy, and for a lot of us, we didn't have access to therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just started doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
expecting it to heal us and to be sort of our salvation. And that means you can't stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
When you stop doing it, the trauma becomes magnified. So for people who find themselves in this position, like, oh yeah, the work is healing to me, and maybe COVID-19 stopping you from doing the work that you used to do has made you realize that you are still deeply hurt, you have not yet healed. I mean, what do you do with that when the stories that you've learned to tell about yourself are the ones that are continually causing you harm and that are being obscured by the work that you're doing? Where do you go?
Great question. I think it goes to a personal practice of healing that is not about your community, right? Because you can heal through community, you can access safe space through your community, but ultimately, sometimes we are like oriented externally. So I'm going to help people who have gone through what I have gone through so they will never go through the same thing again. And that's going to heal me. Okay. But you have already gone through it. And you haven't dealt with the fact that you have gone through it. And you actually need to go home to yourself so you can start that healing process on the inside, not on the inside of an organization, on the inside of yourself. And that is more tender, it's more vulnerable, it's more frightening, it's unsettling, and you will absolutely need company as you go through it, because mentoring somebody who has the same issues as you, talking to a younger person who has gone through the same thing as you, puts you in a position up here where, oh, I can guide you. But a lot of times when you're doing this guiding, you don't have to go deep into yourself. You have to go into yourself, right? And so that is the space for, for therapy. That is the space for group conversations with everybody on the same level, not you anchoring the group conversation, you talking to the people who are your friends, who you can be vulnerable with. And here's the thing, when you are high up in an organization, that gets harder because people think you have it together. People think you figured it out. And for you to come and sit in a circle and say, well, actually, I'm at the same place that you are, that feels violent. It feels vulnerable. It feels exposing. It feels like, okay, but the one thing that I have is that I have figured it out. And so it's about figuring out where are the spaces that it's safe for you to be fully human, because nobody expects you to be the boss here, you know? And asking yourself again and again and again, what do you need? Not what do you need so you can be of use to your community, not what do you need for any other purpose, but just feeding your own soul. What do you need? Because you're right. When you stop working, the trauma is waiting right there because you didn't deal with it. And so, like, you got to go deal with it and deal with the hardness, the harshness of it.
Yeah. And I think wrapped up in that too is fear of success on a particular level. So if you're doing this work well, and if you're being effective, you're getting more people on board, right? So there are more people who are anti-racist. There are more people who are pro-LGBT. There are more people who are bucking misogyny and correcting people when they say female instead of women. You know, there are more people doing that. And as you see them learn more and take up more space and get closer to where you are, maybe there's some insecurity there, right? And that's why power is a part of this conversation. How people hoard power. And you'll see in a lot of advocacy spaces regionally that there are just a couple of people who hold the power, right? Like a couple of people hold all of these positions and all of these committees and boards, and they decide where the funding goes. And when it's time to highlight people, who do they choose? Do they choose the people who are closer to where they are? Or do they choose the people who are, you know, the newest, who have the most to learn still? They call it potential, but it's also their own insecurity. Like do they even know that they're doing it? Do they know that they're doing it? How do you know how you're making these decisions? How do you know how your obsession or your need for power isn't or is guiding your decision-making process?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to know when you're doing that, especially because like that type of behavior is coming from a really deep rooted fear, right? There's a fear that I will become obsolete. There's a fear that I won't be able to pay my bills if I lose this job. There's a fear that they will replace me with this other person, right? And I think that fear will bubble up like, you know, like a gas bubble in your stomach, but then a lot of us just kind of like shake it down, shake it down. Because we're like, I don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want to be that person that's thinking in that way. So I think one of the ways that we can figure out if we're being that person is to start from a place of radical compassion for self. And if you can start from a place of radical compassion for self, it means you can give yourself permission to experience whatever you're experiencing. I won't judge. Just, if anything comes up, I'll look at it and be okay and not judge it, because I understand that there is a reason for it. And whatever is the thing I'm feeling, it feels like it's protecting me in some way. And so I can look at it, but it doesn't mean that, and when I look at it, I can decide how I want to move from there, right? Because sometimes there's logic to it. So I'm afraid that if this other person comes up, then there will be no space for me. Well, that feels like a logical fear, right? Because there is a specific amount of funding that is allocated to the Latin America and Caribbean region, and you will have to compete with other organizations to get it. And if you bring somebody who is close to you to the fore, then there's a possibility that they're going to branch off, start their own organization, and that organization will become your competitor for funding, right? And it's much easier for you to access funding when you're the only organization in your country of this kind. This country's only LGBT or advocacy organization, the only organization that focuses on young women living with HIV. Like the more, so there is a logic there to that fear, which is, well, I know the landscape, and I know that, some of these funders are very granddaddy-ish in the way that they treat us, which is they're gonna have a favorite kid. That's the one they're gonna bounce on their knee and give the lollipop, and then the rest of the children will kind of just sit and look on. So okay, so that's come up now. That's come up. Okay, I feel like I feel like this person is actually really, really good, and they have the potential to be my competition. So what do I do? Is it time for you to open up another director position and give them a co-lead? Is it time for you to have revisit how you're accessing funding so that you can expand where you're able to get funding from? Is it time for you to kind of decolonize your thinking around this idea that it's only if the funding that's coming from the global north that it's legitimate, and think about how you can get funding horizontally? Is there a partnership that you can get into that can offer you funding? All of these things will come up when we confront that fear, right? But the first thing is to be like, okay, this is actually legit. I'm really deeply afraid of it. What are the reasons why? If I'm not the leader here, being the leader here is the only thing that makes my family talk to me with respect. The only reason my family talks to me with respect as a queer person is because I'm the head of a queer organization. And if this person comes and takes this headship, there's nowhere else for me to work. There's nowhere else in civil society that I can work. And I'm going to put this up because a lot of times that's a fear. It's a story, it's not a fact. I fear that because I have been the lead or I've worked in this particular type of organization, there's nowhere else in civil society that I can work. I cannot go corporate, and I'm not in the mood to migrate right now, right? Because let's not forget that migrating is, often on the table for us, just there loitering like, are you going to leave? Ooh, you know? Okay, confront that fear. Is that the truth? Is that the truth? Is it that you actually don't have a skill set that can work anywhere else? Is this the line of work the only thing you ever wanted to do? Are there other things that you could do, and maybe with a little bit of training you could comfortably move out of? But I think in our belly, like deep in the base of our stomach, we have this set of fears, and they come up in the behaviors that we engage in. And I think it's to give yourself space to be afraid. Like, be afraid, be threatened, and then look at it. Like, in that moment when you shut the person down, or you go and bring the person who has been working at the organization for a month to speak, and you have to coach them on the whole speech. Like, in that moment between those two things, like, sit with that feeling and see where it takes you. You're muted.
I feel like there's so many directions we could take this conversation in. But I see that Lauren has a question in the chat. She's asking, how can we get foundations to not re-traumatize leaders and activists by requiring identities that don't reflect mobility? That's kind of its own session too.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think, as activists, we're supposed to activist, right? Like, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make a fuss, and we're supposed to make it uncomfortable, and we're supposed to force people to look at the things that we don't want to look at. I think in some ways, funders are the final frontier, because confronting them brings up that fear for us that we will be excluded from the next funding cycle, and then we will not be able to survive. But I think if enough of us collaborated regionally, and we all decided that this is the pushback we're going to have with the funders this time, then we could say to them, oi, the way you're doing this doesn't make sense. You keep needing us to be the most oppressed of the oppressed to access funding. And I need you to understand that the markers of oppression that you are looking at are actually limited and colonial, and you need to expand your thoughts around it. Because that's the thing, right? They want to fund whoever they think is the most oppressed, and so you have to find a way to convince them that you are the most oppressed, and that despite the fact that your activists have been working for 25 years, nothing has changed. The community is in the same exact place as they were before, and it's disrespectful. Quite frankly, if we're honest, them are disrespectful, right? But it feels weird for you to stick your neck out and say that to them, and that's where I think like regional collaboration becomes important. If we make a decision as a region that this is the conversation that we're going to have with them, then it will force them to rethink how they're functioning. And what this actually highlights to us is the colonial nature of the funder-funded relationship, in that talking to them brings up so much anxiety that we just don't, because they have so much power. And so it's actually a question that we need to ask ourselves is, what are the relations of power that we have accepted inside of this relationship with our funders? And are we comfortable with it? And if we're not comfortable with it, what is the thing that we need to do? And I think as organizations, we can become very isolated, and we kind of start working in silos, and it makes us feel powerless. And so I think like the power of the collective is useful here, because if we're speaking as a collective, because we're so dependent. Exactly, Lauren. We're so dependent that it puts us in this awkward situation. But why have we accepted that? Like, why? If you go to every country, and in every country, every CSO or NGO can be like, man, the funders are the worst. Why haven't we done something for ourselves? you know, because we're afraid, we'll lose the money.
Part of it is realizing that they're the worst, right? And that what they demand of us is ridiculous, and it's re-traumatizing, and it's another form of oppression. So there's that. And then there's the fact that we've actually mastered dominating in the space. So yeah, it sucks. We hate that we have to do this. We hate that we have to put our identities and our marginalization on parade, but we're actually the best at doing that in like our little segment. So we're gonna beat everybody else out for the grants. So while we complain about it, would it really be to our benefit to try to change the way that it works? And so it still ends up coming back to our personal issues with trauma and power, and figuring out what value we have outside of this work.
What value do I have outside of this set of worst things that's happened to me? Like, do I exist outside of this set of awful things that's happened to me? And even when we tell the stories of our liberation, we are encouraged to tell them in a very specific way, right? And it really is, you spend a lot of time talking about all the awful things that happened to you, and then there's 2 sentences at the end about how you got okay. And you are right. We excel at being oppressed, right? We excel, it's not, we excel at creating the narrative of our oppression that is strategic enough to help us to survive. And that's why I want to carry it back here, right? We're trying to survive. We're trying to keep our organizations afloat. We're trying to keep food on our tables. There are some of us that if we weren't employed by this organization, we don't know if we would become employed anywhere, right? So, you know, if you have an organization that's made up and it's headed by like a trans woman or something like that, like you don't know if outside of the space she might be able to find employment. So you're trying to survive. And what else? Okay, so you're trying to survive, and staying in survival mode is killing you. It's killing you. It's making you unhealthy. It's making you emotionally unhealthy and strung out. It's ruining your friendships. It's bringing your organization down from the inside. It's turned you into a token, because the organization that you claim represents the community is completely divorced from the community because they don't trust you. They don't trust you because of the behaviors at the top. So come home. Why did I start this work? I started this work because I care. Why are you doing this work right now? I'm doing this work because I care, but also I have to survive. There's nothing wrong with being in those 2 places, but what are the implications of both for you and for your community? And what does a healthy life look like for you? Your bills are paid and you're dying inside. What next? You're not alone. And that's the thing, is I think one of the things that trauma causes is that you feel isolated, you feel alone, you feel like you can't trust other people. You're anxious at the idea of letting other people into what happened because you don't know if they'll take advantage of you in the same way. And so our trauma actually keeps us separate. It keeps us as human rights defenders feeling like we're alone, despite the fact that we claim that we're representing our communities. What are we going to do?
Yeah, and I mean, even if it comes from a place of fear still isn't an excuse for doing the same thing to other people that was done to you, that caused you the trauma, that put you in this place of constant survival mode that, like you said, is killing you anyway. Why would you do that to other people? And some people don't realize that they're doing that because they're not thinking it all the way through. So I don't know, I wonder if you have any sort of self-assessment tips, questions people can ask themselves. Am I really fucking it up with my power? Like, how do you figure that out? And I'm going to make that my last question, because we're already at 45 minutes, which is ridiculous. And I know Mike is waiting to take us through some breath work.
Yeah. So for the self-assessment, so one of the things that I ask people to do as a self-assessment is when you start listing your identities, right? So when something comes up and you find yourself pulling for your identities as a tool, I'm a fat, black, queer, Rasta, Muslim, okay, what was the feeling? What was the feeling that made you pull for that tool? Like, understand that your identity can become a tool, it can become a shield, it can become a weapon, right? What is the thing that you felt that made you feel like you were compelled to start reciting that to yourself? Is there a feeling you're trying to avoid? Is there a feeling that, oh God, I've messed up, that you're trying to avoid? Because that line of identities can become a salve that we use to soothe ourselves when we know that we've messed up. Oh no, I can't mess up because I'm an oppressed person. And so it's not me messing up. It's always going to be the system. So when you find yourself reaching into your toolbox for your identities to meet a situation head on, ask yourself the question, why am I using this now? And sit with what comes up. The next thing, if there was a white North American middle class cisgender straight man acting in the way that I'm acting, would it be okay? Would I be okay with this? If I weren't me, would I be okay with this, way of treating other people, way of thinking, way of approaching things? Now understand, because you come from an oppressed community or multiple oppressed communities, there's way that you'll have to be agile in how you move as a matter of survival. But sometimes it's good to bring it home and to ask yourself, like, if your behavior be okay, and it wouldn't be, then it's time for you to sit down and ask yourself
I
why.
think the
And the
connection.
final question that I think I would ask people,
Can you
the
rewind?
connection?
You said just now the connection was weird.
Okay, so I'm saying, if you, when you find yourself engaging in something and maybe you read that somebody is uncomfortable by what you've done, or you've hurt somebody, or it seems like it's going weird, ask yourself, if I were a white cisgender, heterosexual man from the middle class man from the global north, would I find a problem with the behavior that I'm engaging in? And if so, it might be time for you to switch. I think also, like you said it in the beginning, how am I using power here? Because a lot of times we're like, oh, I'm an LGBT advocate, and I'm a women's rights advocate, and I'm, a disability rights advocate, and we're advocating for our communities to have a seat at the table, but we're not actually engaging power and how power created that table and how we will have to use power to get to that table. So when you're thinking about how do I get my community to be represented, be honest with yourself that you will have to utilize power to get yourself there. And then ask yourself, is this safe? Is what I'm doing safe? Can I truly say to myself that I have done no harm in the approach that I am taking here? And I think the last thing that I would say is to start from a position of, okay, if the person that I'm engaging had already sustained trauma, would what I am doing make it worse? If the people that I am engaging had come into the space with some type of trauma, would I make it worse? Because I think in a space that, in a space that is a result of the colonial project, right? In a space that has survived the colonial project, a trauma-informed approach, I think, is the only rational approach, because we are all living with some type of trauma. So instead of, when you look at your communities and you see people who are ungrateful to you, or people who are competing with you, or people who are doing all of these things, if I were engaging with somebody who had trauma, would what I'm doing make it worse? And then to ask yourself too, in the ways that I am making myself perform in order to meet these standards that have been set by these external agents, am I making my own trauma worse? And if that is the case, what is the healing I need to give to myself?
Ooh. All right. So we have some questions. We have some tools to at least start us off on the path. And from this conversation, it's pretty clear that it's always going to come back to yourself. As much as you try to deflect and try to blame it on external systems and external forces that do have an impact on your experience, but the way that we respond to it is still up to us. In the same way that, we talk about gender-based violence and that it's most often perpetrated by men. And then the conversation comes around about what men are living with, and that they're being raised from boys to practice toxic masculinity, and that leads to them, you know, expressing themselves in a very toxic masculine way, which is generally violent. And we can recognize that as a systemic issue while still holding the individual accountable for what they're doing, right? So it's the same situation here in our uses of power and our experiences of trauma, and how it informs, I guess, the way that we operate in the space and the way that we access and use and misuse power. But we still have a personal responsibility to get it the fuck together and do better.
All the way together. All the way together. We do. Yeah.
Lauren has one more question. We got to get through this quickly.
Yeah.
Can you speak on how mobility or changes in lived experience are related to beliefs about self-worth?
So there are some of us who are incapable of admitting that things have changed for us because we don't think that we deserve the changes. And that's why I think I always start discussions from a perspective of healing. But even if we don't think we deserve it, it doesn't change the fact that we're inhabiting the space. So I can think I don't deserve something, but still be inhabiting it every day. But yes, for some of us, it is difficult because we are still inside of our own pain, and we don't think that we deserve to move forward, or we think it's a fluke that we got there, or we just got lucky, or we're looking for the other shoe to fall. And that can also exacerbate the situation, because if I am living in a different position of power, but I'm unable to accept it because I don't think I deserve it, there's really no end of damage I can do from that place and not see it, because even I don't believe that I have the power that I know have. And that's why I think for people, for anybody, for everybody, like a deliberate practice that's centered around healing is important. So that we can move, so we can, be mobile, so we can travel that distance, and B, so that we can be responsible to the people around us who are around us while we're trying to heal, because there's a way that trauma can invisibilize a lot of things for us, even to ourselves. The number one thing that it will make invisible is your intrinsic value and worth. And when you start healing, then you're able to see that, and you can be better to you and for you and to everybody else around you. So please heal, everyone. Heal, heal, heal. I can't say this enough, y'all. We gotta heal. Gotta heal, y'all. We gotta heal.
So as a first step to healing, we're gonna learn a little bit about breathing, because that's pretty important. So thank you, Carla. If you stick around for the breathing, I'm still gonna come back to you again. But thank you so much for being here and being in conversation with us, people. Carla is beyond incredible. I struggle to find words to describe her, but you will have to see for yourself. Follow her on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. More Talk JA. That's more like the last name, Moore Talk JA. Lots of great nuggets, lots of honesty and kindness and compassion in short little videos. And some of them are long. Some of them are like long lives that get you your feelings in a good way. So definitely follow her. And the next person up, definitely want to follow her as well, Micah Smith. She is Bahama Hoop Yogi on Instagram. Micah is a yogi, as you might have imagined, who's amazing with hula hoops. Like I don't even know how she does what she does, but she does that and even more, as you will see in this breathwork exercise. Hi, Micah. Are you there and ready? And
yes, I'm here. I'm ready. Hi, everyone. How are you? Can you hear me good?
Yeah, it's great.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, so my name is Micah, and like Alicia said, I am a certified yoga instructor, also a mental health professional. So I have my master's in developmental psychology and child psychology, and my concentration is in mindfulness-based interventions. That's kind of how I ended up with yoga. I started my own personal journey because I was dealing with suicidal ideation and traumatic grief. And so I started through meditation and then ended up following all the way through until I got certified. So today we will just be going through some breath work in yoga. It's one of the 8 limbs and it's called pranayama. Prana is our life force or our energy, our spirit that animates our physical body. And today during our meditation, we will just be doing a little bit of breathing and affirmation to help us tap into our personal power. So the type of breath that we'll be doing today is alternate nostril breathing and Ujjayi breath or victorious breath. And these two are very good calming breaths that really help you to push past your limits, especially the Ujjayi breath. If you do engage in any kind of physical practice, the Ujjayi breath is very good. It just helps to power through the body. It helps us to reach our breath a little bit more deeply. So we can take in a little bit more deeply and also release a little bit more deeply. So you can come to a comfortable seated position, whether that be if you're sitting in a chair, you would want to come to the edge of the chair and place both of your feet firmly on the ground, knees stacked over your ankles, or you can crisscross applesauce like I am. If you feel like your back may get tired, you can lean up against the wall. And we take a big bellyful inhale and exhale. 2 more just like that, in through the nose. And loud sighing exhale out through the mouth. Last one. Big belly full inhale, bring your palm to face forward. And you have 2 options here. You can take the ring finger and your pinky finger and your thumb finger, folding the other 2 down. And as you inhale, you can bring the ring and the pinky to your right nostril and inhale through the right, or inhale through the left, sorry. And then bring the thumb to that other nostril and exhale through the right. Does that make sense? If that's a bit difficult, you can just use the thumb and the index and go back and forth. So inhale through the left, exhale through the left. And just keep switching. Nice, slow, controlled breath. And you'll find as you breathe that one nostril will be a little clearer than the other. And the whole point of this is to just even out both sides of the nostrils before we engage with double nostril breathing or our normal breath. So a few more breaths just like that, in through the nose, in through the nostril, out through the opposite. Big belly full inhale, relax the hands away from the nose. And now we're going to move into our Ujjayi breath, our ocean or victorious breath. Big belly full inhale in through the nose. And as you exhale out through the mouth, I want you to imagine that you're fogging up a mirror. So you'll notice that hissing sound that comes out. So we're going to breathe just like that 3 more times. As you exhale, become familiar with the constriction that you feel at the back of the throat. And as you continue to move through those breaths, on that next exhale, I want you to seal the lips as if you're frogging up a mirror. Or seal the lips, keeping that same constriction in the throat. And as you breathe, you'll hear kind of like a dark fader kind of sound, or something that sounds similar to the ocean. And this is your Ujjayi breath. So we're going to continue to engage with this breath. And if at any point during this meditation you feel like you begin to lose this breath, you can simply open the lips, fog up your mirror, seal the lips, and return to your breath. With every inhale, we're drawing deep into the pit of the belly, up into the chest. Exhale, press the navel back towards the spine, pushing every little bit of carbon dioxide out of the lungs. Our emotions and our breath have a very purposeful relationship. As we move from one emotional state to the other, we find that our breath is always the first thing that is affected. When we become enraged, our breath becomes short and shallow. When we're shocked, we tend to hold our breath. When we're frustrated, our breaths become long as we sigh. And when we cry, again, our breath becomes sporadic. Our emotions and our breath go hand in hand. So if we can learn to breathe in the midst of any situation, we can create little moments of peace throughout our storms. Our breath reflects our deep inner knowing. It connects us to our power. This is the power to inhale and draw in what we need, and the power to exhale and release whatever does not support our highest good. Your breath is a reflection of your deep inner knowing and your profound personal power. I am powerful. I trust myself and my intuition. I am deserving of happiness, growth, and expansion. I believe in myself and my ability to create change. I am balanced. I have the capacity to forgive myself and others. I have the power to transmute my pain and negative experiences to find peace. I am confident in myself. I know my worth. I stand up for myself. I speak my truth. I am divine power in human form. My breath serves as a constant reminder that I am here, I belong, and I am enough. Take a deep bellyful inhale. Bring your right hand to your heart center. Place your left hand on your lower abdomen. Take a deep bellyful inhale and take this final moment to speak a kind word to yourself. Express gratitude for your body, for how it allows you to experience and move through this world. Express gratitude to your mind for how it allows you to perceive and understand this world. And express gratitude to your spirit, your life force, for allowing you to animate this beautiful body. Take a deep bellyful inhale. Bring hands to prayer position at your heart center. The light in me truly honors and acknowledges the light in you. Until next time, love all, serve all, and create no sorrow. Om Namah Shivaya. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Micah. Really, really appreciate you joining us and leading us through this exercise. Everyone, please remember to follow Micah on Instagram. Where else are you, Micah? Are you on other social media?
I've been contemplating creating a Twitter, but as of right now, I just have Instagram.
Okay, so Instagram people, Bahama Hoop Yogi, it is in the chat. Thanks again to Carla Moore Talk JA, and thank you to all of you for coming and participating in this session. You can find information about the other events on our Facebook page, facebook.com/equality242. All of the registration links are available at tiny.cc/16 days registration. I hope that you take everything that we talked about here, as well as the breathing exercise with you through the rest of the day. Have a peaceful Sunday and carry that with you throughout the rest of the week. Hoping to see you on Thursday at the next session, December 3rd at 4 p.m. We're talking with Geeta Anani from Beirut, London. She runs Abad and successfully campaigned for the criminalization of rape marriage. And Antonia Kirkland from Equality Now in the US that is campaigning for getting rid of discriminatory law and expanding women's human rights. So join us for that conversation about campaigns for legal reform. That's it. Enjoy the rest of your day.